So I welcome you to today, and we are now going to dive into the area of how to prepare for your exams and the exam countdown. So I'm going to talk you through a cycle that I believe is quite important in preparing for any examination, and then see how that can relate to you as an individual, as a person doing a professional qualification, as an adult with likely other responsibilities in your role. So the first thing that we need to do is look at this cycle as a complete picture in terms of understanding how we calculate your countdown time, making sure that you have familiarity around your syllabus. What are your strengths and areas for development? Therefore, then what do you need to revise and how do you revise? What does summarizing the content look like? And then how can you test your understanding? And then maybe going around that cycle again, depending on when you're sitting for exams. So this cycle is really important and it should be followed as a step-to-step process. And wherever you are in your preparations, this is where you can start to go through this as a step-by-step cycle of what exam have I got? How much time have I got? What do I need to know? What do I know? What don't I know? Where do I need to revise? What is my content that I need to understand? And then can I test myself to see if I'm able to understand it? So I'm going to break this down for you into some easy steps, really, in terms of what you can go away and do after this webinar in terms of preparing for those May exams or future exams as we move forward. So in terms of calculating your countdown time, this is quite an important step. The more we plan, the more we prepare ourselves for these examinations, the more confident you are going to feel. So looking back at what time do you actually have? So and breaking it down into the different individual aspects of that. How many days is that? Actually, how many hours can you commit to, and being realistic about that? You have other responsibilities, and we'll look at how that might work in a minute. But what does that need to be included? You need to take those into consideration as well. But you also need time to relax. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well in terms of how you need to prepare as an individual for your exams. So starting with your exam date, counting backwards, and then to the point of when you're going to start your preparation for these exams. So that might look like something like this. So I've done a hypothetical countdown timer, and it might be something that you'd like to recreate. So my exam date here is on the 14th of May. So I've counted backwards and I plan to start my preparations on the 4th of May. So I'm giving myself 10 days prior to the exam to make sure that I am prepared for that exam. And you'd be wanting to do this for your first exam date, making sure that you are prepared for those and for each of the exam days that you may have if you're sitting more than one module. So I've calculated and looked at that as days. I've looked at what days they are and what other responsibilities I might have on those days. So on Saturdays and Sundays, I'm saying that potentially I can commit to 4 hours on those days around my other responsibilities. My weekends, I'm not working. I don't have those other responsibilities. But on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, I'm working. So I've got a couple of hours in the evening to be able to prepare on top. So that's realistic for me with my other responsibilities. I might have family, I might have other things that I do in my life, my hobbies, my activities that I've already got planned in. So I'm now going to then start thinking about what they are. So actually on the 4th of May, I've got to take my children to a party. So I know that that's got something, I've got to work around that time. I'm going to make sure I've planned that into my calculated downtime. And then actually on the 10th of May is my birthday. So I know that I've got a birthday dinner on that evening. I'm not going to be able to commit to 2 hours that evening. So I'm not going to plan anything. I'm not going to put pressure on myself to make sure I've done that. Now I know how many hours I've got available in total for my preparation time. So I've got 24 hours available, plus I've got 2 hours final prep on the day before. I don't want to be doing learning the day before, but I've got 24 hours in the run up to that day before that exam. I've got 4 learning objectives, therefore I've got 6 hours per learning objective. I can then go back and then map my learning objectives so I know what I'm learning, what I'm reviewing, when I'm doing it. So what's that going to look like? So I've made sure that I've given myself 6 hours per each of my learning objectives to run through my revision cycle for each of my learning objectives. And I've given myself 2 hours on the day before exam for final preparation to make sure that I am prepared. But I have taken into account all of the other things that I've got that I need to do during that 10-day period. I know that I've got a kids' party, I've got a rehearsal because I'm part of a theatre group, I've got my birthday, and I've got a family gathering on the 12th of May. So I now start to think about how I can then break my time down. And then when I'm going to start to think about that, is I now need to then think about what does that look like on those days where I'm going to get a clash, where I haven't got just 4 hours block time potentially to be able to do that. So I start with looking at the full picture, and then I start to break down my time even further, particularly when I've got other commitments. So I'm going to start to look at what that's going to look like on the 12th of May when I know I've got a family gathering. I know I'm going to be busy. So I now need to, and this supports people around me as well in supporting me. They know when I'm going to be revising, when I'm going to be preparing, and what I'm going to be doing. And we're preparing here so we know what we're facing each time. So I've also scheduled my time here in terms of making sure that I've got an hour in the morning and I've looked at what I'm going to do. I've gone back to my cycle. I'm going to start with my syllabus review for this learning objective. I've got areas for development for a learning objective. I've then got my family time. I know what time I've got to be there. And I also now know what time I've got to leave. But I've made sure I've put time in the afternoon to have time with my family and dinner, put the kids to bed before I then crack back on with my preparation, making sure that I'm start looking at what I need to develop, and then I'm going to summarize. I've now prepared for my, the learning objective. And I've also made sure I've got some relax time. I don't want to go to sleep at night thinking about everything that I've covered. I want to make sure I've got a good night's sleep, ready for the next day. This is very, very close to the exam, so I need that downtime just to switch off, just to let my brain rest before I start to prepare. So in terms of calculating your time is really important, and sharing this with people that it's going to affect and impact on with you. It's really useful for you to be able to plan it out. And I would suggest that the best method for doing this is before you get to this day 10, is that you sit down, you look at your calendar, you sit down with your family, the people that you've got commitments with, and you say, look, what time have I got and what time can I commit to? And planning. We would do this in our daily work life, so why wouldn't we do it in our planning for our exams, which are as important in terms of preparing for? So we're going to make sure we plan, we schedule, we time, and we share that with those people and in and around us as well, so they're aware of what we're doing and when we're doing it. So that's the first stage. The second stage then comes on to making sure we're familiar with the syllabus. So that comes into this. That's what we're going to do during this time. So as you'll know, this webinar, as I said, is covering everything and may have students that are sitting level 2 right through to level 6 and looking at how they prepare for their exams. Just as a reminder, obviously, there is the updated syllabus, which started in March 2024 as the full course. So making sure that you're looking at the right version of the level 4 syllabus, but making sure that you understand which syllabus it is you're sitting and where you are going with that. So understanding your syllabus, which I'll delve a little bit more into now, but making sure you've got the right one. Each of the syllabus can be found online and are easy accessible through that. They can either be viewed online or they can be viewed downloaded as a full syllabus, and you can have that printable for yourselves as well if you require it. So this is where you can find them online on CIPS, and then you'll be able to find those syllabus for your relevant qualification. Once you've got the syllabus, it's about understanding what each of the different areas mean and what that means for you. And that's going to become quite important as we delve into the depths of what the syllabus looks like. So a syllabus is made up really of 3 different aspects. So you have your learning outcome, and that's the overriding content for that. So it gives you the big outcome of what that looks like, of what you're working towards, of what you will be able to do once you've understood the full content. Then we have the assessment criteria. Now, the assessment criteria is quite important on the grounds that it has that command word in there. So the command word in this case, as we see it on here, was compare. So that tells you what you're going to need to be able to do with the information and need to be able to do to be able to understand that learning outcome that it relates to. Now, there'll be a number of assessment criteria for each learning outcome, and I'll show you how to break these down as we go forward. And then we have what's called indicative content. Now, that indicative content breaks down into the sort of the minutiae of the understanding of what that looks like. So what all of those things that you will need to be able to do to complete the assessment, to be able to show and demonstrate that you have that learning outcome embedded in your knowledge. So there are three levels that break it down: the learning outcome, the assessment criteria, and the indicative content. So the indicative content is the knowledge that you need to be able to do to meet the assessment criteria to demonstrate your understanding of the learning outcome. So understanding those three different levels and what that means to you. So in the front of each of our study guides and in each of the syllabus, it gives you this information about how to read your syllabus. And it shows you how to understand each of those. So there is a reference point for that. So you're not going to need to remember that from today's webinar, but make sure you understand what you're looking at when you're looking at your syllabus in terms of that. And a reminder that the syllabus is what is used by our examiners to write the exam questions and is to test those knowledge. So they are using this information to prepare your assessments. So that the greater that you understand this, the more depth of understanding you will have for our assessors that are trying to assess you on the content. So getting underneath the syllabus is quite important. So when we're familiarizing yourself with the syllabus, the next stage is therefore looking at how you map out your learning objectives. What does that actually look like to you? So knowing what is the learning objectives, how will you assessed? I mentioned that command word. What are you actually going to need to be able to do with that indicative content? What does that actually mean? And there are previous webinars and support material on our website that tell you what each command word means. So please look out for those on either on our YouTube channel or on the website itself to understand each of the command words that you might come across if you're not familiar with them already. It tells you what content you need to understand, and obviously utilizing the support material that you may have, either study guides, your own notes, and levels of understanding, and all the material that we have available. What does that mean? What does that content mean in the bigger picture? And then mapping that theory into your practice. So what does that look like in the real world? What does that look like in your own role? Or what does that look like in case studies that you may have been provided with or come across? What does that really look like rather than it in paper? And then making sure that you understand why that is relevant, but also why not. Sometimes the theories won't be relevant, and actually the understanding, the explaining the why that theory doesn't work in that context is really useful in understanding its application as well. So understanding the sort of the reverse element of those things. So when you're looking at each learning objective, following this pattern of what am I going to be assessed on and what's the command word? So what am I going to need to do with the information? And what actually is that information? And what does that look like in the real world in terms of sort of case studies and practice? Okay. One of the very useful tools that I've always utilized when it comes to looking at syllabus and preparing for exams is known as RAG rating. RAG rating stands for red, amber, green. And really what we're doing here is utilizing the RAG rating to look at each of the pieces of indicative content as to what I'm able to do. So as I'm going through and getting familiar with my syllabus, going through and highlighting what I'm confident with. I know this. I'm going to give this green. This content at the top about type of purchase, such as new purchases. I am confident of that. I do that in my job. I understand that. I know what this content is. So that's green. I could answer questions on that. I'm fine. Then my second part is actually, I know something about this and I have some understanding, but I'm not fully confident. So that's amber. That's that I'm not really sure about this. I'm not 100%, but I have some understanding of this. And then red, I really need to look at this again. I don't understand this. I'm going to have to go over it. I might remember it, but I don't know how to do it. So that's my red. These are my red flags for something I know that I'm going to really need to revise over again. And this starts to go into our third stage where we're starting to look at our areas of strength and development. So this is our crossover from mapping our syllabus. I've now identified or started to identify the areas where I'm going to need some support or that I am confident in. So it's now in a position to be able to prepare me for our next stage, which is identifying strengths and our areas for development. It's as important to know your areas of strength. So knowing what those green areas are, those when we're rag rating, what is green? What do I know? Right. So I'm going to make sure that I know these, because ultimately I actually, other than potentially the couple of days before an exam, I don't need to revise these. I'm confident that I know these. I might already be utilizing the theories, the models, the concepts in my current day-to-day practice. So I can put that on the back burner. I can say, these are the things that I'm confident with. I need to just keep an eye on them, and I need to make sure that I know what I've got to do with that information with a command word. But it is really important to know what you know. And then you can say, I'm confident with that. And quite often what you'll find in mapping your syllabus is actually that, 50, 60% of it might be green. And then you've already got that confidence. You're able to go in saying, actually, I know a massive chunk of this. I'm already confident with it before I start preparing. You're not in a position where you're going, I need to prepare for everything. I've got to revise and learn a whole 4 learning objectives in preparing for my exam, when actually I actually only need to learn 60% of that, because most of it, or 50% I know. So it's important to identify that. Builds confidence. It builds knowledge in the fact that what you've done up until this point of preparing for an exam has already done the work. You're already prepared. And then we're going to go and identify those from identifying our strengths. We're going to then identify what are our areas for development. What am I not confident with? What are those amber areas and what are my red areas? And we can then use that RAG rating to also prioritize what we need to know. And there are 2 ways of doing that. We can prioritize either by the amber of I just need to get these over the hill. These are the ones that I just need to do a little bit more on to make myself confident, that they're almost green. So I need to make sure that I get these green, and then I can go back and look at my red. You're never going to know everything. So there are 2 methods of doing this. Or you can prioritize depending on your time frame, on what your countdown timer looks like. Actually, I've got quite a lot of time. I can then go and I can have a look at my red ones, and I can go back. I can watch recordings of videos that I can get on the Intelligence Hub. I can go back over the content in my study guide, and I can really get underneath that red stuff to make sure that I'm either making that orange, amber, or I'm making it green. So how you prioritize depends on your time frame, and what you need, but and where you need to be for that exam, and what your percentage is for what's red, amber, and green. But to look at your areas for development, start by noting down the assessment criteria that you're not confident with, and then start to look at those sort of questions on it. What do you need to do? Keep really an eye on that command word. What have I got to do with the information that I'm now going to revise? What do I need to do with this? And now you know what you don't know, we can now start to focus revision appropriately. So I'm just going to do a quick review of those steps 1 to 3 and why they're so important. And this is all about preparation. This is about preparing for exams and not sitting down in front of you with your syllabus, your revision guide, your notes, your information that you've got, the intelligence hub open going, right, I need to start revising. Preparing for that and knowing where to start, when to start, and what that looks like is really important. So knowing what time you have gives you that space to be productive. It gives you that productive edge. You need to know what you need to know. So understanding the syllabus, there's no point looking at notes, etc., if you don't understand what sits behind it or what you're going to be obsessed on. Knowing what you do know prevents you trying to learn everything from scratch. So you don't need to sit down and go, right, I've got to learn the whole of L3, M4 right from the scratch because I'm preparing for my exams. You'll know some of it already. So knowing what you know means that you can eliminate that from your preparation. And then areas for development provide that focused revision in the right area.